In this video, we will show you how to replace your power steering rack bellows boot on this Ford Fusion. This is part of your front steering, located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing you have to do is safely raise and support your vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done so, we'll continue on with removing all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. With the wheel out of the way, let's continue on following the outer tie rod end to where it connects to your inner tie rod end. You're going to find that you have a jam nut right here. Use a 21mm, break this free. Rubber mallet might help. Now once you have movement from this area, we'll continue on at our outer tie rod end nut. To remove your nut, you're typically going to find that you have some sort of locking cotter pin. Go ahead and remove that cotter pin, and then we'll remove the nut from the area. Use a 19mm to remove this nut. Once you have that off of there, just give it a quick inspection. Start it back on a couple threads. At this point, we're going to separate the outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. I have the nut on here as a safety precaution, so when I tap on this knuckle, the tie rod will come down, but it can only come down so far. Broke free after a couple bunks. Quick inspection, make sure you didn't damage the tie rod end in any way. Set that nut aside. Let's take hold of that outer tie rod end, turn this counterclockwise, count the amount of turns it takes to remove it, write that number down. 1, 2, and so on. I got 18, yours may vary. We'll use some locking pliers. Hold on to the inner tie rod end so the shaft can't spin. Use a 21mm to remove this nut. At this point, we'll continue on to starting to remove the bellows boot. Start where the bellows boot connects to your inner tie rod end shaft. You're going to find that you have a small clip here. Go ahead and squeeze the 2 ears, slide it out of place, and break the bellows boot free from the inner tie rod end. Need some pliers for this. A quick inspection of our clamp. Typically, you will reuse these. If it's damaged, you can also use a wire tie. Use a small pick. We'll just break this free. There we are. Get a little movement from that. Let's pause here and make our way to where the bellows boot connects onto the power steering rack. As for the clamp in this area, typically you're just going to cut that out of the way. We'll use some long cutters for this. Take hold of the boot, give it a little twist, and remove it from the power steering rack. Give that a little tug. There it is, friend. Let's clean and inspect the power steering rack. Just give this a quick wipe, double check to make sure you don't see any fluid coming out of this area. If you do see fluid, typically that means that the power steering rack seal is in poor condition. The next thing I typically like to do is go ahead and wipe out this little ball joint right here for the inner tie rod end. We'll apply brand new grease inside this area that'll help keep moisture and debris out of here. Once you have plenty of grease on there, we'll be continuing on with that grease, and we want to ensure that we cover this groove right along the inner tie rod end. In this groove is where the boot will sit. Okay, let's continue with the installation of our brand new power steering rack bellows boot. We'll take the wire ties, start it right over the very far end here. This is the area that will slide over the power steering rack. We'll leave this nice and loose. Slide it in position onto the power steering rack, and then tighten this wire tie. Slide that onto there. Press it in as far as possible. Now we can secure this portion of the boot. Make sure it's sitting in the groove on the inner tie rod end. Using a wire tie for this. You could also use your original clamp if you still have it. You want to make sure these are nice and tight so the boot can't slide out of position and no dirt or moisture can make its way in. Use some copper anti-seize on the threaded portion of your inner tie rod end and continue on with your jam nut. Let's install our outer tie rod end. We'll take this, get it in position. Once it starts on, you want to count the amount of turns it takes to put it on. Make sure you have the same amount of turns as it took to remove it. 1, 2, and so on. Let's take this and slide it into the steering knuckle. Slide it up in there, continue on with your castle nut. We'll be taking this, start it on there by hand. Snug it up, torque it to 35 foot-pounds. Once you've torqued this to 35 foot-pounds, the next thing you want to pay attention to is the small hole that makes its way through the tie rod stud and the corresponding slots on the mounting nut. We want to try to have the slots aligned with the hole, and then we'll slide through a locking cotter pin. If for some reason the slot is not aligned with the hole, continue tightening the nut until the very next slot does. Let's make our way to the jam nut with our 21mm wrench. We're going to turn this until it bottoms out completely against the outer tie rod end. Just make sure that's nice and snug. Level it out. Install your wheel. We'll start on all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts, bottom them out. Get the wheel safely back down on the ground, and then we'll torque each of these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay, friend, we finished installing our Bellows boot on our vehicle. At this point, you can go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test, listen for funny noises, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Aside from that, thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.